Okay, so you know how we used to like print out directions from MapQuest, like
Mhm.
back in the day?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now we just blindly follow the GPS like wherever it tells us to go.
Right.
It's kind of weird when you think about it. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, right? This whole idea of creeping normality. These big changes that happen, but we don't even notice them because they happen so gradually.
Yeah, it's like that metaphor, the frog in the boiling water.
Exactly.
They don't realize it until it's too late.
And the funny thing is, this creeping normality thing, it's not new. It actually goes all the way back to like 19th century geology.
Yeah.
Who knew rocks could be so insightful?
Right.
So I'm curious about this. What's the connection between rocks and, well, everything else?
So it all started with this debate about how the Earth's landscapes are formed, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you need these huge catastrophic events, or is it just these really slow, gradual processes over time?
So like earthquakes versus erosion, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, imagine trying to explain the Grand Canyon just with earthquakes. You would need a lot of them.
You need a lot too. So walk us through this geology showdown. Who are the main players?
Okay, so on one side, you had catastrophism. They believed that these big events like volcanic eruptions, meteor strikes, those were the main drivers of change.
So like big dramatic events shaping the planet.
Exactly, yeah. And one of the big proponents of that was Georges Cuvier. He was a paleontologist, and he was looking at fossils from different time periods. And he was seeing these massive differences in the types of life that existed. So he's thinking, well, something huge must have happened to cause such dramatic changes.
Makes sense. So what was the other side of that argument?
Okay, so the other camp, they were all about uniformitarianism. And they were arguing that no, it's actually the slow, steady processes, like erosion, the stuff that's happening every day. That's what actually shapes the planet.
So more like tiny changes over eons creating something massive.
Yes, exactly. It's like those time-lapse videos where you see a flower bloom. It's like, wow. And one of the big names in this camp was James Hutton. He was a Scottish geologist, and he was obsessed with sedimentary rock. You know how it forms in those layers upon layers over long periods.
Yeah.
And he realized that these tiny little accumulations over time can create these massive canyons, mountains, you name it.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the connection to creeping normality here. It's like just like with those rock formations, our norms, our values, even our beliefs can shift dramatically without us ever really realizing it, just from a series of like, oh, it's not a big deal moments.
Precisely. And what's fascinating is that this whole debate, this geology showdown, it actually mirrors how our minds work.
Yeah.
But we'll dive into the psychology of it all a little bit later.
So we've gone from like massive volcanoes to this idea of creeping normality. But how does this whole rock thing actually relate to like how our brains work?
Okay, so imagine, like way back when, the days of dial-up internet,
Oh, the screeching.
right? You'd wait like forever for a picture to load. And now imagine trying to explain that to someone who like grew up with high-speed internet.
They wouldn't even understand.
They'd think it was like
Yeah.
the Stone Age or something. What used to be normal is just gone. But
Yeah.
we don't think about how we got from there to here.
It just kind of happens.
Exactly. Our brains, they're really good at adapting, even if it's not always the best thing for us. Like, think about touching a hot stove. Instantly, you pull your hand away, right?
Pain, reaction, done.
Danger. But creeping normality, it's more like the heat slowly turning up. We adjust without realizing it. And that's where those biases we talked about come in. Anchoring bias, remember. Judging things based on what we're used to.
Right. So something crazy gradually just becomes like, oh, yeah, that's normal now.
Exactly. Like, remember when gas was, well, a lot cheaper. And then habituation. Our brains, they tune out things that are constant, even if it's like a constant change, like a dripping faucet.
At first, it's like drip, 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 and then you don't even hear it until you see your water bill.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get it. We tune it out.
And that's the thing with creeping normality. So this isn't just about rocks, right? Our sources had some pretty intense examples of this in action.
Oh, yeah, like real life situations.
Easter Island, have you heard about
The
this?
statues.
Yeah. So they were this advanced civilization, but they gradually, over centuries, chopped down all their trees.
Wait, all of them? How do you even, why wouldn't they notice?
Because it's gradual. It's not like they said, hey, let's destroy our environment. They needed wood fuel, buildings, moving those giant statues. Each generation probably just saw a slightly more barren island.
So each generation is thinking, well, it's always looked like this, so it must be fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the danger. A small adjustment over time, civilization collapses. And we're seeing it now, too, with privacy and technology. I
Yeah.
mean, remember when the idea of companies tracking everything you do online seemed creep?
Like Big Brother, totally.
And now, we just hand over our data without a second thought. Location, browsing history, our deepest thoughts on social media. It's all become so normal.
We're the frogs, slowly being boiled by data.
It's not always bad, though. Some sources pointed out creeping normality can also be behind positive change.
Wait, really? The same thing that can make us ignore a slowly disappearing forest can also be a good thing. So it's like creeping normality can be this like double-edged sword. On the one hand, we've got disappearing forests, but then there's like positive social change happening too. How does that work?
Yeah, it's kind of wild, right? Like, think about how much society's views have shifted on things, even in the last few decades, like civil rights, LGBTQ rights, ideas that used to be considered like radical are now totally normal.
Okay, I see what you mean. So all those small actions, the protests, the laws changing bit by bit, it eventually adds up to a whole new normal.
Exactly. It shows that creeping normality, it's just a process. It's not good or bad on its own. It's how we use it.
So it's not about stopping change, it's about making sure the changes are actually taking us somewhere we want to go.
Right. And that's why it's important to pay attention to history. One of the sources talked about how we need to be aware of how things have changed over time
Yeah.
so we can spot trends, see where things are going.
It's like when you look back at old photos and you're like, whoa, did I really used to dress like that? Except it's about like society, not our bad fashion choices.
Totally. And don't be afraid to question things. Like, just because something seems normal now doesn't mean it always was, right? Or that it should be.
So if something feels a little off, don't just ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, is this change actually good? What are we giving up for it? And remember, you've got a voice.
Yeah.
You have power. Even if you can't change the whole world, you can still make choices that line up with what you believe in.
So stay informed, think for yourself, and make good choices.
Got it. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned before about how emergencies really speed up this whole creeping normality thing.
Oh, right. Yeah, one of the sources talked about COVID. Suddenly, things that would have seemed crazy before, lockdowns, masks everywhere, it all just became normal.
And those were supposed to be temporary, right? It's kind of scary how quickly things can change when there's a crisis going on.
For sure. And it's not just pandemics. Any big shakeup can create like this environment where rapid change becomes the norm.
So knowing about this whole creeping normality thing, it's even more important now, helps you make sense of things.
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of it. I know I've learned a lot, and hopefully our listeners have too. So next time you're out and about, see if you can spot some creeping normality happening. What's changed so gradually that you didn't even notice? Keep those brains switched on, everyone, and we'll catch you in the next episode.